eventually they would just stop and he'd be fine for a while, and then they would come back. All the physicians that basically were attending him during his illness, they were all young and inexperienced. So they were all in their early 20s. So they're basically like right out of college. And it's probably because that's kind of who he attracted to himself with his personality, was young people.
Plus he was so like so liberal, and so like that's the age where people are kind of exploring that side of things.
Right.
So,
and he was a very arrogant person, so he probably didn't want an older doctor trying to tell him what to do. He wanted a younger doctor he could basically say, I don't want to do that, and they would just
right.
And that was a lot of it as well, I think. So that February of 1824, Pietro Goomba, that was the brother to his mistress Teresa, because he was friends with him and the father. But he found Byron lying on a couch, yelling that he was not well, and then they said he had a fit, in quotation marks, and
like a seizure.
Yes, probably. And he said before that he was complaining about a pain in his knee and he couldn't walk. And according to one of the doctors, his name was Millingen, his mouth was drawn to one side, and during the fit he foamed at the mouth. Oh. He gnashed his teeth and he rolled his eyes like someone having an epileptic fit. And they said it lasted for about 2 minutes. So he's either having a convulsion from his fever, or he was having a true epileptic fit. You know, like he was having some kind of a seizure. Probably due to fever, I'm guessing, because that happens. And the next day he was really weak. They said he was sleeping till like about noon, but I don't think that was anything odd for a man of his stature. Not stature, but, you know, like... Yeah. Right, men of the time carouse all night and sleep until noon because they were up all night drinking and having sex. So I don't think that was anything abnormal. But they said that he was really weak. And his other doctor, it was Millingen and Bruno. And Dr. Bruno and Millingen bled him because that's what you do.
That's what you do.
Faints. Yep. And they applied 8 leeches to his forehead. And they said that he started to bleed uncontrollably because it was too close to his temporal vein. And it made Byron faint. So they're trying to make him better, and they're making him worse. And his recovery, they said his recovery from this fit was very slow. And it was like 2 days later, his eyes became inflamed. So, like, it's just like, these accounts I actually got from an article that pooled together all the things that were written by all the people around him, like what the doctors had said about his physical, like what was wrong with him physically. So a lot of it is written in like old timey, but this is just like what they wrote. And they said by February 20th, he was feeling well enough to go out riding, because that's what men did for exercise back then.
They rode their horse.
Man, you would ride your horse around. So like he was well enough. He went out riding. On February 22nd, he had another convulsion in the right leg, but it recovered quickly. So basically, his body muscles were convulsing,
like cramping.
Basically, like he was in his right leg, and then they said he recovered quickly from it, but it happened. Like his right leg was twitching, and during the next week, he was on, like, they kept him on a restricted diet of vegetables and fish, and they said he was recovering on this diet. So they're like, you know, this sounds like a Mediterranean diet. He's in Greece, so like,
right, makes sense.
Eat that olive oil, buddy. It's good for you. By March 1st, he complained of spells of vertigo and having nervous sensations, whatever that is. So maybe he's having like weird nerve, like the twitchy thing, or
like anxiety, like palpitations or something.
Yeah, I think he was feeling nervous about things. He was feeling overwhelmed by nerves.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout March, he complained of feelings of oppression in his chest. So, like, he was having tightness in his chest all throughout March. They said that he would ride when he could. If it was raining, then he wouldn't ride. By April 9th, he was out riding. He got caught in the rain, which caused violent perspiration. And later, he started shuddering with a fever and rheumatic pain with a headache. By April 10th, the next day, he was visited by his doctors. His 2 doctors, we'll use the term doctors very lightly here, where he told them of wandering pains and alternating chills and fever. So he's having like pains intermittently all over his body, and he's going between shivering uncontrollably to sweating uncontrollably, with having horrible fevers and then chills. They wanted to bleed him, and he refused. He didn't more people die from being lanced than from, right. So they gave him castor oil and a hot bath instead of bleeding him. I'm like, okay, what the?
So
You know what?
He
You
shit
give people
himself.
basically in the hot bath. Yeah, like okay, we'll make you poop then if you can't bleed you. We'll make you evacuate something else. Fun.
That's what they did. You could give a leech or an enema. There's the two things.
Right. The next day, it's April 11th. Dr. Bruno gave him antimony powder, and this was to reduce his fever because he still was feverish. And then he was getting slowly, not getting really any worse, but not getting any better. But by April 14th, he complained of head pain. The servants who were around him witnessed episodes of delirium. So he's like getting delirious at this point. The next day, April 15th, he had violent coughing, which made him vomit. So he started vomiting, coughing and vomiting. He sounds totally miserable how this man dies.
Mm-hmm.
April 16th, next day. The doctors eventually convinced him, like this whole time, they're trying to bleed him. And he's like, no, I don't want you to bleed me. It's not going to help me. Right. And that finally, he's feeling so terrible. They convinced him to allow him to be bled. And they drew a pound of blood, of blood, and then repeated it again 2 hours later. So in one day, they drew a total of 2 pounds of blood off this man.
Jesus.
Yeah.
His heart's going to stop.
Right. So on April 17th, they took another 10 ounces of his blood, and they're putting leeches on him too. So you can't forget the leeches. And he was at a point at this point he was in a delirious state almost all the time. And 2 different doctors were called in and stated that he was too weak for any more bleeding, and they applied 2 blistering plasters on the insides of his thighs.
What the frig?
And he was still delirious and having convulsions. Okay, I'm going to describe to you what a blistering plaster is.
Yes,
it's really
please.
Horrible. It is what they would call a counter irritant, and it was used to alleviate pain. And basically, the plaster, when applied to the skin, would cause blisters or red spots, like bringing blood to the area and away from the afflicted part of the body. So if he's having a headache, they're going to put a blistering plaster on the back of his neck to draw the pain from his head to his blisters that are forming from this caustic material they just stuck on his skin.
So basically, they just made them hurt more.
Yeah.
You hurt now. Not only do you have a headache, you have blisters on your neck.
Yes, and your inner thighs. This is where they put them on his inner thighs. Doesn't that sound pleasant?
No.
Yeah, absolutely not.
I'd kill a person.
He was still delirious and having convulsions even after this. Go figure. It didn't help.
Can't imagine.
Oh.
Why?
Right. They eventually got him to take some laudanum and ether, but he was having trouble swallowing. So they again applied blisters to the thighs and the back of his neck. Because
that makes perfect sense. I can't swallow, so I'll give you blisters.
April 18th. And at this point in Greek, it's the day they celebrated Easter. On the Easter day, Dr. Bruno was back leeching. He had applied 12 leeches to him, and he bloodlet 2 pounds of blood.
Jeez.
This is only a couple of days after he just took 2 pounds of blood. He was still having episodes of delirium. He's having delirium from blood loss.
He has no blood to his brain.
And also, he was given senna, Epsom salts, and castor oil.
Jeez.
They're applying caustic plasters to his body. They're causing his skin to blister. They're taking out all of his blood. He's covered with leeches, and they're giving him stuff to make him shit his brains out.
This is horrible.
Yes. And
My God.
After they gave him this wide array of things to make him shit, he went to the bathroom. They said it was the last time he got out of bed. I'm like, no, duh. Like, really? I'm so surprised. Like,
there's not an ounce of blood or nutrients in the man anymore. Can't imagine why he didn't get out of bed again.
I know. And the doctor applied leeches to his temples for the remainder of the evening because he wanted him to make sure he could go to sleep,
Yeah, that makes me want to go to bed and relax. Some leeches.
Yeah, leeches stuck to my face. Yeah. Okay,
and it just makes me just want to go right to sleep.
Well, and the Greeks loved Byron because he's like helping them fight for their independence. And this is a famous poet, right? They the Easter celebrations in the town were held back because of his illness. So like we don't want to celebrate because this man is sick. He could die. So we want to like just, you know, we're going to scale back our celebrations because we don't want to be like
disrespectful or something.
Right. So April 19th, this is Easter Monday. He remained unconscious with a weak, thready pulse and stertorous breathing. So I'm thinking his breathing was labored. His pulse was weak and intermittent. And at 6:15 p.m., he opened his eyes and then he closed them and died. And it said he died of inflammation of the brain. And I looked out and because they took detailed notes on what they did to him. And they said because they measured the leeches before they put him on and after, so they knew how much blood was in there. And they know about how many, like the fluid ounces of a pound of blood. It said that they took about 2.426 liters of blood from this man.
How many do you have? How much blood you got in you?
Isn't it like,
we just said it last episode and I can't remember now.
A gallon and a half or something?
Yeah, so maybe? That's a lot of your blood taken out.
Yeah, it's like almost half, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like a fourth anyway. It's like they took a ton of this man's blood and then he died. I'm so surprised.
I can't imagine why his brain was inflamed.
I know. It's like, really? Seriously? And a whole page and a whole front and back of a page just on what these men did to him while he was sick.
That's horrible.
It is stated on his deathbed, because he knew, he's like, I'm dying. He basically knew he was dying. And he said he did not want to be buried in England. He didn't even want to nourish their worms in their soil. Like he was really, but he kind of went back and forth because there were some times that he would talk to his friends and say, oh, I want to go back to England when I die. And then when he's actually dying, he's like, I don't want to go to England. Just bury me here. During his autopsy, the doctors found a congested brain, a flabby heart, and diseased liver, in their words. That's what they said.
Flabby heart.
A flabby heart. Yeah, it's on his diseased liver. That's not a shock because the man was a heavy drinker, right? And they did send him to England because why would they do what he wanted?
Right.
He doesn't need to. He's dead. He doesn't care. During the autopsy, they removed his heart, his brain, and other organs from him, and they were placed in 4 different urns. The Greeks kept his lungs and his larynx, because he used his breath and voice for Greece. They wanted that part of him. Boy. I'm like, that's actually nice.
Kind of poetic, actually.
It is, and they kept it, but the urn was lost 2 years later when the Ottomans sacked the city. Something happened to the urn and it was missed, like it's gone. So they had it, and then not anymore. He was embalmed and sent to England, his body, because, why would they
follow his wishes?
Right. They preserved his body in 180 gallons of spirits on his trip overseas in the ship. Yes.
Oh.
Like when his body arrived in England, it was preserved in 180 gallons of spirits. So, I mean, he was pickling his liver his whole life with alcohol. So why not just
pickled his whole body? He's just a big giant pickle.
Yeah. So it doesn't, other than that, it doesn't mention how they embalmed him, but I'm thinking they just embalmed him in alcohol.
Sounds like it.
I'm assuming. At Westminster, they wanted to bury him at Westminster Abbey because he was a lord, but they refused his remains because of the scandal regarding his unnatural acts with his sister and men. They're like, nope, he can't come in here. We don't want him. So he was eventually interred at the family crypt in Hucknall Torkard, which sounds like straight out of Tolkien, in Nottinghamshire. The doctors, like, the vault is what they buried him in. It was called a vault. It was closed for good after the burial of his daughter, Ada Lovelace. And a little bit about her. She was a famous mathematician, and she was considered the first computer programmer in the 1800s. I kid you not.
So cool.
She published the first algorithm for what they called the analytical engine, and that was it was like a theoretical machine that was written out by a man, Babbage, something like that. I didn't write his name down, but she wrote the program, the theoretical program that would run on this analytical engine that he wrote.
Oh, so, that makes my head hurt.
Yes, and it's like
I don't
she
understand any of it.
Wicked smart, I mean, she was writing an algorithm for computers that weren't even invented.
They didn't even know it was a thing. Yeah.
Insane. This woman was so smart. But unfortunately, she died of uterine cancer at the age of 36 in 1852. And after they buried her body in the crypt along